recording this meeting. So if you don't want your likeness recorded in the recording or your voice recorded, you can keep your camera off and interact with us through the chat. You don't have to speak through your microphone, but we are recording it so that we can post that on the project website, and anyone can go back to it and watch it again, or anyone that missed tonight's meeting can watch that. So, as I said, my name is Corey Pitts. I'm the project manager on this project, and with me, I have a couple of folks in the project team who will be helping me go through presentation materials tonight. We have Paul Silverman with the consultant team, who'll be talking about some of the traffic information, as well as Kyle Roberts, who you can see on the video. We also have Matt Stork and Jacob Smith, also from the consultant team, who will be talking about some of the concepts and the concept costs. And then we also have some additional county staff who will be listening in and helping take notes. So with that, Kyle, do you want to go to the next slide? So here's what we're going to cover tonight. We've covered the first bullet, welcome and introductions. We'll recap real quickly what the study goal and objective is, do a very brief recap of what's been done up to this point prior to this additional study and the outcomes up to that point. And then we'll get into the meat of tonight's presentation and talk about the corridor alternatives relating to the concept design, the costs, traffic operations, and how each of the alternatives compare to themselves. And then we'll talk about next steps, and we'll have plenty of time to answer questions tonight. So the overall project goal for this study was to identify improvements along US 29, Colesville Road, Columbia Pike, that would complement the investment that was made in the US 29 Flash Bus service that started back in 2020 to improve corridor travel time and reliability for all modes of travel, and to increase pedestrian and bicycle access and safety. And so in terms of what's been done up to this point, starting in 2018, when the study initially kicked off, the project team studied both a managed bus and HOV lane alternative, as well as a median bus lane alternative. And that initial study concluded in 2020. There were presentations made to the community, as well as to the planning board, and ultimately to the T&E committee with the county council. The team also looked at and identified pedestrian and bicycle access improvements to flash stations between the Silver Spring Transit Center and Tech Road stations. And all of those findings were, like I said, ultimately presented to the Council Transportation and Environment Committee in January of 2021. Following that presentation, the T&E committee requested additional study of the median bus lane alternative, and that's what this additional study is doing. As well as part of the most recent budget cycle, so this would be the FY 23-28 budget cycle, the County Council did approve some funding to advance the pedestrian and bicycle improvements as part of that budget cycle. So there's a new capital improvement program called the US 29 Station Access Improvements. And there is some funding to start making improvements for access around the stations. And as part of that capital program, those projects will be going through their own public process as they're identified. Additionally, MDOT-SHA has been advancing other projects along the corridor, such as the Oak Leaf traffic signal and pedestrian improvements around the Stewart Lane intersection. So tonight we're going to be talking about the alternatives for the corridor. And so there's the no-build alternative, which means that we wouldn't change anything to the existing conditions. Everything as it exists today would stay the same. There's the manage or the bus and HOV lane alternative that would look to create a bus and HOV lane from Musgrove Road to Spring Street. And this would be done through bus on shoulder north of Musgrove Road, and then expansion of the shoulder between Musgrove and Stewart. Nothing really in the middle parts of the corridor, and then some repurposing of lanes south of Sligo Creek Parkway. And then there's also a dedicated median bus lane alternative from Tech Road to Sligo Creek. And so one thing that I want the members of the CAC, as well as any of you who may not be CAC members, but are just interested in the corridor in general, to think about as we walk through the remainder of the presentation is there a corridor alternative that you prefer? Of the three, no build, managed lane, or median bus lane. And then the second question is, should a flash station be added at Franklin Avenue? So there's not currently a flash station at Franklin Avenue. That was a comment that was received during the second phase of the study. And so we've got some results on that and want feedback on whether that's something that should move forward, assuming that a project moves forward out of this. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Paul and Kyle to kind of walk you through each of the alternatives and the analysis itself.
Thanks, Corey. So the first alternative, as Corey mentioned, the corridor-wide alternative is the managed bus and HOV lane. And if any of you recall from the previous study, this is basically carry forward as it was presented last time. And just to refresh, it is around the state right now we have HOV lanes on some roadways. We have red bus lanes and a few other roadways, and we have even some reversible lanes, obviously, on this corridor and Silver Spring and other areas. And what we're proposing is to sort of enhance and expand that system of managed lanes up and down the corridor. So basically, we would have from Musgrove to Stewart, 650 to Southwood Burnt Mills, and Dale Drive to Spring. We'd have, at least in the peak hours, and the peak directions, we would have a combined bus and carpool lane in operation. Whether that's with some red paint or some roadside signs or some overhead electronic signs, that's to be determined, but we would have a managed lane. And we would also include intersection improvements at the 6 locations that Corey mentioned up and down the corridor. And then, we have alternates proposed. These are optional. You'll see more information on this in subsequent slides. We have alternates proposed for changes to flash stations at 2 locations, Burnt Mills and Four Corners. So again, these are optional. This alternative can move forward without the station changes, but we do feel they could enhance overall operations and transit performance. And then we're not proposing any changes to the lane widths anywhere in this corridor. What's out there today would remain. We would just manage the lane differently, whether it was the shoulder or the left lane or the right lane or the reversible lane, whatever lane it might be. Next slide. So again, this is the different segmentation. So you can see on the top in the segment from Musgrove to Stewart, in the southbound direction, which is on the left of the top cross section, we're actually converting the left lane to a bus carpool lane, and we're shifting the 3 lanes over so they would ride on the shoulder and improve shoulder during peak hours. There's no vehicle travel lane reduction in that segment, but the left lane is given over to the buses and carpools. In the middle section, which is 650 to Southwood in the morning, it is converting the existing left lane, southbound only in the AM, to a bus and carpool lane. And then in the bottom segment, Sligo to Spring, it's converting the center reversible lane from just a general purpose lane to a bus and carpool lane. So we're still maintaining 3 general travel lanes in the peak direction there. So where you don't see the yellow on the stick diagram on the right, that means that the bus is in mixed traffic. So this alternative, again, really, I like to say surgically and strategically identified segments of the corridor where the bus would get caught up in increasing congestion, and we wanted to prioritize them through those few blocks and other segments that didn't need to happen. Next slide. And this is just the reciprocal, the PM period of the managed lane alternative. So you can see we're mirroring the same thing in the northern section from Stewart to Musgrove. We'd run the 3 lanes on the right, general traffic, same as today, except the right lane would be on the shoulder. We'd give over the left lane to the buses and carpools. In the middle section between 650, and this would only start at Burnt Mills, so a little bit of a smaller segment, we would run the bus and carpool in the left lane. And then coming out of downtown Silver Spring, we'd run the bus and carpools in the reversible lane. So we'd still maintain 3 outbound travel lanes in that section from Spring to Sligo. Next slide. So in the median bus lane alternative, I think this is, again, very similar to what you saw in the original study, but we've made some enhancements about the limits of the median bus lane and the number of signals and some other geometric changes, but operationally still functions very similar. So from Tech Road to Silver Spring, that entire limit would have some type of dedicated bus lane, whether 1 lane in the median or 2 lane in the medians. It would actually include 2 of the intersection improvements, Greencastle and I-495, but not all 6. And it would require the Burnt Mills and 4 Corners flash stations to be relocated. So this would not be optional. It has to be relocated to allow riders to use the median bus lanes, the buses to get on the buses in the median bus lane. It would also include 4 new traffic lights along the corridor to help left turns and side street traffic get in and out of the neighborhoods, now that the median would be used for buses. So also some left turn restrictions at about, I think, another 4 intersections, and we'll dive into that. But again, this does not change the lane widths either, unlike the original concept, which did change the lane width. So we're holding the lane width there. So that's the high level of the median bus lane. Next slide, please. So again, in here, we have a couple different configurations. We do have between Tech and Stewart, the bus is in the median, but it's on the shoulder. It's not like in a complete dedicated transit way. So the left shoulder is improved. It's in the median, but it's sort of still adjacent to traffic. Then from Stewart to Lockwood, it's in a single median busway, which would be operated primarily in the peak direction for the one direction of buses. The other direction would run in general traffic. And then in the section between around 4 Corners, basically 4 Corners down to the Beltway, it would be a dual busway, meaning there'd be 2 lanes for the northbound and southbound buses, and then it would go back to a single lane serving the peak direction, so southbound in the morning, northbound in the evening, and other times of the day to be determined, but it would just have a single lane. So again, the entire segment here from Tech to Sligo is getting some level of dedicated bus lane and transit priority. Next slide. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kyle to talk about the performance of these 3 alternatives, including the no build for vehicles, carpools, and buses.
So the no build results and the managed lane results would be results that if you were at other meetings, at previous meetings, you would have seen those already. And then the median bus lane is the alternative that had some fine tuning and those changes that Paul mentioned made to it. And so what we see is in the managed lane, we get a reduction over the no build. We're going down to about 40 minutes from end to end of the corridor for an SOV car. And then the managed lane, which is going to carry the buses or the BRT buses, as well as the HOVs, that's going to drop quite a bit over what the standard passenger lanes would be in no build. And I will note that did assume some additional HOV ridership due to that facility being provided. And then in the median bus lane, we are really maintaining what would happen if you weren't to do anything to the general lanes today, but we're able to provide a single or a double dual busway in the median. And you can see that that really does quite a bit reduce by roughly just under 20 minutes, probably, the BRT travel time of the corridor, because this is a dedicated way. Only the buses are using that median busway. And this is the AM southbound direction. So the next slide will show the PM. And so in the PM, we have the no build in the managed lane. So the managed lane is reducing BRT, or it's reducing the BRT over the no build, and it's also reducing SOV and HOV vehicles. And then in the median bus lane, we are, with these other intersection improvements and signal timing and signals, we are getting a reduction in our regular passenger lanes, but we're also accommodating the BRT, and we're able to get a few minute reduction in BRT travel times as well, while providing that dedicated facility for the BRT. Now, in that median bus lane alternative, it is a median guideway. So there would need to be protections of left turns crossing that guideway. And there are several new signals, as Paul indicated, that will provide access to the neighborhoods, but there also would be some turn restrictions necessary for safety of left turn movements. So this is displaying those locations where left turns would be prohibited in this median bus lane alternative. I will note that most of the volumes, the AM is the first volume and the PM is in parentheses. Most of them are less than 25 vehicles in your peak hours. And so it is relatively small numbers being diverted. But we are providing access at signalized locations, generally one street up north or south of the turn prohibition. So Oakleaf Drive is one of them that our alternative did not need a signal there, and we were able to provide that access at Prelude. I will note that at Oakleaf, SHA is, it seems, moving forward with a signal design there. So that may be brought in ultimately as part of another project. At Northwest, those turns would be able to use Burnt Mills Ave. And then also there would be some turn restrictions at Lockwood and Hillwood, which would also be able to use Burnt Mills Ave. At down towards Four Corners, there would be northbound and southbound turn restrictions at Lorraine. The northbound would be able to use Southwood, and the southbound would be able to use a new signal that would be installed at Timberwood. And then further south in the corridor, we have some turn restrictions at Brewster and Layton, and those would be able to use the Hastings Granville signal to access those neighborhoods. So how does that this kind of ties some of this together. And this is really a summary. So these travel times are what you saw in the bar charts. So these are just enumerated here for both passenger vehicles and BRT. And then we're also summarizing the number of signalized intersections that operate with an LOS E or F. And so that is 11 in the morning and 8 in the PM if under no build conditions. It would reduce to 5 and 5 in the managed lane. And there's a slight increase under the median bus lane alternative up to 13 and 11. And that's partially due to the new signals that I mentioned previously. Person throughput, there is a little bit of a bump in the managed lane. The no build and median bus lane are relatively similar. The bump is primarily that there's additional there's higher occupancy due to that HOV and that motion. For the right-of-way impacts and costs, Matt will get into this, I think, in a little more detail as we look at some of the role plans. But there's 6.9 acres of right-of-way impact in the managed lane, and there's 5.5 in the median bus lane. Now, there is an asterisk there, and that's because the burnt mills and the Four Corners stations, as Paul mentioned, those would be optional in the managed lane scenario. So that would reduce 1.5 acres of impact at burnt mills and 1.2 acres at Four Corners. And I will note that of that acreage listed, some of that is just stormwater management. And then for the costs, the managed lane would be about 105 million. These costs have been updated to 2022 cost. As you know, costs have increased quite a bit since maybe some of the previous meetings that we showed other numbers. And then the median bus lane is 125 million. Now, if those stations, those optional stations in the managed lane were not put in place, that would save 16.6 million at burnt mills and 8.7 million at Four Corners. So these next slides, I know this may be a little small to see just because of the size of the corridor, but this is showing basically the LOS at each of the intersections in the AM peak hour. And so if you see red or orange, those are your LOS E's or F's that I mentioned in that count. And you can see how that changes between each of the three scenarios. And then we have a similar graph for the PM that will show the differences and changes between each of those scenarios. And that's how those numbers in the table were calculated. Now I think Matt will talk a little bit more about the station designs and some of those cost and right-of-way implications.
Thanks, Kyle. Just a comment about the right-of-way. Kyle, drop back to slide 15 real quick. So just in terms of the right-of-way numbers that are shown there, the vast majority of that, 5 acres of the 6.9 and 3.2 acres of the 5.5 have been identified as potential right-of-way needs for stormwater management. So it's not necessarily, strip takes or adjacent property that would be necessary. The way the State Highway Administration prescribes the cost estimating task for this level of concept design is they've identified a formula to identify the potential stormwater management needs based on new pavement, base widening, reconstructed pavement. So the stormwater management needs will come out really in final design. Is it really going to be necessary to have 5 acres of stormwater management for the managed lane? Time will tell. But again, the vast majority of this right-of-way requirement is for stormwater management. The other thing that I'll mention is that as we look at the individual property impacts, less than an acre across the 5+ miles are from residential properties, and some of which is really some HOA property. So it's not necessarily from everyone's front yards or backyards. Kyle, we can go ahead and jump back. So the next half a dozen, 5 or 6 slides are excerpts from the concept roll maps, which will be provided at next week's public meeting. But what's represented here on this slide and also the next one is the location of the stations at burnt mills. What's identified here is the managed lane station, which we've indicated is optional. It provides median platforms. It does provide some operational benefit, but there are some consequences of providing 2 platforms in the median. You all know that on the west side, there is that retaining wall supporting that parking lot. To be able to accommodate 2 stations in the median, we'd have to push west toward that retaining wall. That retaining wall really can't be reconstructed or replaced. We'd actually have to put another retaining wall in front. On the east side, any widening really does have an impact to that body shop. So for cost estimating purposes, and that's outlined in that red shape, for cost estimating purposes, we've assumed that that is a full take. It is possible that perhaps the front portion of that building could be modified so it's not a full take. But to be conservative, we've assumed that that's really a full take, and in fact, it is the only full take property acquisition in any of the alternatives across the entire alignment. Most of the right-of-way requirements are strip takes, and you can see the little strip take on the right, just north of Hillwood, that there would be a slight strip take to be able to accommodate any widening. So again, this is an optional station at Burnt Mills for the managed lane alternative. Next slide. So this is the station configuration that's proposed for the median bus lane. Again, we really want to avoid that retaining wall on the west side. So what we've done is we've only shown a single platform in the median, and then we've pushed the northbound platform to the right-hand side of the road in the vicinity of that business, that body shop business that we've identified as a full take. And so that reduces the need to have to widen on that west side of the roadway toward that retaining wall. Next slide. And down at Four Corners, again, this was an optional station for the managed lane alternative. It does provide some operational benefit. Moving that southbound station into the median sort of gets the bus out of the way of the congestion that for traffic that is trying to access the Beltway. But in the northbound direction, we've sort of relocated or reconfigured the existing flash station. It does have some impact to the school property. Next slide. This is the median bus lane station alternative for Four Corners. And this provides this is a dual busway. And so we do have both stations in the median, and it shifted a little bit further north than where we were proposing to provide a station for the managed lane alternative. And then finally, this is the optional station at Franklin for the median bus lane alternative. There is a median station in the southbound direction. And then in the northbound direction, to try and minimize property impacts, we've shifted that station to the right-hand side of the roadway going north. Does require a reconfiguration of the Franklin intersection. And the sort of the added cost to provide a station at this location is in the $4 million range. I think that's back to you.
I think it may be back to me. So in the third segment, which is from Sligo to the Silver Spring Transit Center, we looked at a lot of configurations. Obviously, this is a more complex section with the reversible lane, very, very constrained right away. So we looked at several options on, where to put dedicated bus lanes, in the reversible lanes along the curb. And we tested them for various impacts to bus travel time savings, as well as general traffic. Some of the challenges we had was that, as you get closer to downtown Silver Spring, we recognize, that in the business district, there's been a change in traffic levels, especially, during the morning. So our models don't really recognize this. And so we feel that this is an area that needs a little bit more exploring, and so internally to the county, the Division of Traffic Engineering and Operations will be leading an effort to better assess priority bus lane concepts, looking at some kind of road diet lane repurposing south of Sligo Creek. Next slide. So again, the two alternatives, the managed lane is on the left, the median bus lane is on the right. You can see the limits of each of the different sections, whether it's mixed traffic, bus on shoulder, HOV with 3 regular vehicle lanes, HOV with 2 regular vehicle lanes, or a single bus, median busway, or a dual median busway. So this is a good side-by-side comparison. Like Corey said, this material will be posted for further review and consumption, as well as shared next week again at the in-person public meeting. Next slide. So again, the summary of operations by segment, really we decided that, there's natural partitioning of this corridor in the north section, almost up to Burtonsville down to Tech Road. So, the one option there is to harden the shoulder to create the bus and carpool lane, or just a bus only lane. It's about $52 million. We don't see a lot of benefit to that right now, but we're withholding our recommendation until after this round of public and CAC outreach. And of course, we want to recognize the Fairland Briggs Cheney master plan is still underway, and that could be changing the vision, that segment of the corridor. The middle segment from Tech Road to Sligo Creek, we have the option to harden the shoulder and repurpose the lanes there to create a bus HOV or bus only lane. It could be, in the median, it could be in the left lane, and then the potential to add a new station at Franklin Avenue. So that cost is $105 million for the managed lane and $125 million for the median. And note again, the median does have those station reconfigurations included. And then in the southern segment, really again, it's looking at can we do a lane repurposing in the peak direction or in both directions, or just rush hour or all the time, to create a bus HOV lane or a bus only lane. And that pilot study is being evaluated and implemented by the Division of Traffic Engineering at a timeline to be determined. Next slide. So I'll turn it back over to Corey to close our formal presentation and our next steps, and we look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Paul. So this is just a very high-level overview of the remaining schedule for this effort. We're here tonight at the CAC meeting. As has been publicized, there's an in-person public meeting next Thursday, October 13th at Pinecrest Elementary School from the same time, 7 to 9. And we'll be walking through many of the same materials, but have staff available to sit down and talk through specific questions with members of the community. We are tentatively on the planning board schedule for November 10th to share a briefing on the findings of the study to the planning board and hear their feedback. And then we are also on the schedule for November 28th to go before the County Council Transportation and Environment Committee to share the findings. As I mentioned, or as Paul mentioned, there is a pilot bus only lane project from Sligo Creek Parkway to Spring Street that our traffic division is undertaking. That is really just getting underway now. And so there'll be a schedule and publication of materials and schedules and more information to come on that once that study really gets up and running and underway. We have created a very brief survey, which you can access at the link here, or if you have your cell phone, you can hold your camera up to the QR code there, and it'll take you to the survey. Just a very few number of questions asking about, preferences for alternatives, the Franklin Street station, and where you live in reference to the corridor. We appreciate any feedback that we get, whether it be through the survey, through emails, or through, comments received tonight or next week. And with that, there are already a couple of questions that have dropped into the chat, so I'll raise those so that we can get those answered, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the room for questions. If you haven't participated in a meeting with us through Zoom, the best way to get your questions answered, if you would like to ask them through your mic, is at the bottom of the screen. In your Zoom, there should be a reactions button. If you click on that reactions button, there should be then a button that says raise your hand. That way, if you raise your hand, we can kind of call on everyone in an orderly fashion, let you unmute yourself so that we don't have a bunch of people talking over each other. If you'd rather just ask your question through the chat and have it read out, you can open the chat feature, which is a button on the bottom of the screen as well. And you can type your chat and we'll get that answered that way. So the two questions that we've already received, the first one was a question about how are we maintaining the lane widths with adding 2 median bus lanes. So I don't know if Paul or Matt, do one of y'all want to answer that?
Well, sure, there is some addition, there is some base widening in order to accommodate to be able to maintain the existing lanes. The original median concept narrowed the lanes to 10 feet, which would be unacceptable to state highway. So we're maintaining it at least a minimum of 11 or existing. And in order to do that and accommodate the median bus lane, there is some widening, which is, resulting in some right-of-way impacts.
The other thing to note, Matt, is up in the northern portion, those 2 lanes are actually coming from the interior shoulders. So they're not coming from the outside and pushing the road out.
That is correct. There's some inside and outside widening.
Okay, this question is probably more for you, Paul. Question, have you modeled the managed lanes without the HOV? This individual is skeptical that the HOV will be used appropriately and would like to see what the results would be if no one is actually using the HOV appropriately.
That is an excellent question. I think the quick answer is we have not modeled the entire corridor for the managed lane without the HOV, because initially, when we started this project several years ago, we knew that in order to make the managed lane work, especially in the segment where through the Burnt Mills area, where we're essentially repurposing a lane, we had to shift some solo drivers to carpool to make that work. In a somewhat post-COVID world, where some of the traffic volumes are down, headed into Silver Spring and the Beltway in the morning, that may not be the case. So we will discuss that as a project team and see if we want to take a look at that. We understand the issues have been raised in previous CAC meetings, public meetings about potential enforcement. Right now we're really still in the planning stage of this study. So as it would advance into a formal design project and engineering, we would be looking at enforcement projects. I mean, there are examples, like I said earlier in the call, there are examples of HOV lanes, red bus lanes, all over the state, not necessarily on the same street, but all over the state. And many of them are using advanced enforcement technologies. And there are combination HOV and bus only lanes in other parts of the country on signalized streets and even internationally. They use advanced enforcement technology. So we don't feel it's really a barrier to prevent the project from advancing if this alternative were chosen, but we do feel that, it would be definitely a new type of traffic control and roadway design that would require education and some level of enforcement warnings and notifications and ultimately fines if, if it were to be selected and designed and constructed. And also we have to mention again, we probably said this 50 times over the life of the project, but this is a state highway. And so ultimately, whatever the county decided to do here, the state would have oversight and final say on how things are enforced and operate. I hope that answered your question.
Question as to, for modeling purposes, what was the definition for HOV? Is it 2, 3, 4?
Jim, you want to take that?
Now, yeah, just a sec. It was 2+. So HOV was allowed in the bus lane if it was 2 or more people. And that is one of the things to note is that doesn't force all HOV traffic to be in the HOV lane. It depends a lot on where they're going up and down the corridor, if it's to their advantage to move over.
Great, thanks, Jim. Question here, can you compare the pedestrian and driver safety differences between alternatives? What about bike infrastructure? So I'll take the second question and maybe then throw it back to the project team on the first one. In terms of the bike infrastructure, there were over 200, roughly 200 different bicycle and pedestrian access improvements that were identified during the initial phase of this project. And those were documented, they're up on the project website. The county council has placed funding into a new capital improvement program focused on station access improvements. That the funding started this fiscal year. And so those bicycle and pedestrian improvements will be starting somewhat separate of this whole effort. So they're not necessarily built in or tied to either of these alternatives. Those can move forward on their own trajectory and on their own schedules, depending on funding as well as community support. Does someone want to take the first question about pedestrian driver safety differences between the alternatives?
Great question. In terms of pedestrian safety, the managed lane alternative looks more like existing conditions in terms of physical changes to the footprint of the road. So expectations for pedestrians in terms of crossing the street and where the bus stops are probably very similar to existing conditions. The median alternative obviously has, requires some flash stations to be moved in the median. So, pedestrians will have to cross the street to get on and off the bus. And we've tried to enhance those crossings, like with the new traffic signal at Sligo, but, the median is another part of the road to cross or additional lanes within the median to cross. So that is, a challenge for pedestrians. We don't have a lot of predictive crash data saying that it's necessarily more dangerous for pedestrians, but it is a new environment for pedestrians. But then again, on the other hand, the managed lane, will have what we would call dynamic traffic controls, right? So different times a day, different lanes are used for different vehicles and drivers, carpools and buses and just general traffic. So, and the shoulder versus the inside lane. So I think, changes in traffic patterns can always increase the risk for certain types of crashes. So we have to be mindful of that. I would expect, in the report, we'll be providing some information on the safety, a propensity for both alternatives, but there's no clear cut more dangerous alternative between the two, in my opinion. They both have their risks, which needs to be addressed in the design. Great question.
Another question, is the narrowing of the lanes to 10 feet along a state roadway actually not legal? Or is it just thought unwise, or that's the question. I think the person's trying to get at, like, is there any reason why the state wouldn't support narrowing the lanes to 10 feet?
Yeah, I may defer to Jake in terms of the roadway classification question. Certainly south of Sligo, the lanes are already narrow. We maintained them. We didn't increase them or decrease them. And in certain segments of the card, the roadway classification changes, and there are specific requirements from state highway for lane widths based on the roadway classification. Jake, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, the roadway classification for primary highways, secondary highways, or arterials, or any major highway with a posted speed greater than 40 miles per hour normally requires a minimum lane width of 12 feet. Any secondary highways less 40 miles per hour or less usually require a minimum required lane width of 11 feet. That's SHA's criteria for their roadways. There are instances out here where the existing lanes are 10 feet currently. So we would maintain those since it is already acceptable to have that 10 feet, but we would not reduce a 12-foot lane to 11 or 10 when the minimum is required to be 12 feet.
And I'll just add that if we were to propose something like that, it would require a waiver from the design standards. And since that, at least at this stage, is an unknown, we held the 11 and the 12. As I said, when I say unknown, it's unknown whether the state would approve that sort of a waiver.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think this has come up, if not on this project and previous project, for the state to put in, lane widths or put in new lane widths. There may be some segments that pre-existed, but put in new lane widths that are below standard for this classification of roadway. They have to, because it's part of the national highway system, they have to actually get federal highway approval, and federal highway may remove some funding for maintaining the road. So it's not a guarantee, and it's a risky proposition for state highway. So that's why we tried hard to keep the minimum desirable lane widths based on state guidelines.
Thanks. I guess that to sum that all up, though, it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just at this stage, because the state won't commit to something that's just a concept, we've held a conservative view and tried to keep the lane widths unchanged. That's something that could be explored during the design stage if there was interest. Next question. How would it affect buses' ability to adhere to their schedules at rush hour, or maintain their frequency, to have varied amounts of carpools in the lane with them? In other words, if the carpools increase dramatically, does a managed lane confer as much travel time reduction for buses versus the bus exclusive lane?
Well, this is another fantastic question. You all have brought your A game tonight. Thank you so much for making this interesting. I would say to that question, we proposed the carpool lane combo, because it's actually a good managed lane design that we've seen in other parts of the US and internationally, but B, because the corridor legitimately has good propensity for carpooling. And so if your goal is to move the most people in the least amount of pavement, it's really a great tool, right? So we can run all the models we want, but we can't, we'll never predict exactly how many carpool riders there will be and vehicles. So that's one reason, like Jim said, that we're starting the HOV threshold at 2 persons per vehicle. That allows the state and county to monitor it, and should the lane become too congested and the buses can't maintain their schedules, we can increase it to a 3-person level, or even ultimately, at some point way in the future, a 4-person level. Again, this was carefully, and even some corridors do dynamic carpool requirements. Certain days of the week could be 2, or certain time periods could be 2, and others could be 3. So, this was carefully discussed based on the bus schedules. In other words, how many buses are there going to be in that lane per hour? So if you have the flash in the median, most of the other local buses are going to be along the curb. So, there is a lot of extra minutes in the hour that lane is essentially empty. So we thought it was, a good idea to allow carpools in the managed lane alternative, because it would make the most efficient use of that pavement. I hope that answers your question, or at least explains our philosophy behind setting the HOV2. And, again, we assumed a 10% mode shift in the managed lane, which means that, for every 2 cars that are on the road today with solo drivers, they'll be replaced by 1 car only in the managed bus HOV lane. So it's a real good net positive in vehicle reduction.
Thanks, Paul. That's all the questions I have in the chat. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask, or are there other questions that people want to drop into the chat? Norman, I see you've got your hand raised.
I do. I have a number of questions. I had more, but you've answered many of them. I'm just one question is, why is the county doing this if this is a state road?
So, the county does make improvements along state roadways. The state has a lot of competing priorities across the entire state, and can't necessarily do everything in the county that the county would desire. We implemented the flash bus service that's currently running on US 29, and we operate it. So the study was an outcome out of a proposed suggestion to create a median bus lane that came out of the Corridor Advisory Committee for the BRT. That got attention, and people wanted to see us study it. And so we have studied it. We expanded the scope of the study to include, alternatives that would improve mobility along the corridor, because when we improve mobility along the corridor, even if it is a state road, it does benefit the county and the county's residents, in terms of businesses, residents accessing their houses, people trying to get to activities or schools, everyone benefits. And so, that's the reason why the county has done the study. How it would move forward has not been determined. Assuming something does move forward, there could be partnerships with the state to try and move this forward if this is something that they also see value in and want to try and see done in a timely fashion.
Okay, who will maintain this? Will the county maintain it after they've designed it? And I presume you implement it as well.
Great questions. These are questions that would be explored further during the design stage. So, in terms of the existing flash infrastructure, the stations, those are being county maintained. They are out on the sidewalk, and the county maintains all of the sidewalks, even along state highways. So the state really just focuses on the roadway. We haven't implemented a bus lane on a state roadway yet. We do have other corridors where we're looking at this as well. And those details of who owns and maintains that piece haven't been formally addressed or determined. But there are questions that have been raised and are being thought about. So that would have to be resolved as the project would move through design.
Okay, one thing is you've talked about water management at one of the intersections. Is- Currently, I'm having a problem between the county and the state where the sewer is on a county road, but they claim that the pipe that leads to Sligo Creek Parkway was never transferred to the county. Once you put in a sewer and you have a pipe that's taking it somewhere, are you going to make sure that there's ownership between the sewer and the line in case there are breakages in that line, but yet it's collecting water from that sewer?
So I can't speak to your specific case,
No,
but
I
in
don't
terms,
ask you to.
yeah, so I'm just clarifying. So in terms, there were stormwater features that were designed and constructed as part of the flash stations that went out there because we created additional impervious surface by building the flash stations. Where those features are in the state right of way, they are designed to state standard with the expectation that the state will ultimately own and maintain those features. Where those features fall outside of state right of way, so they fall on either county right of way or some other, well, they would fall on county right of way because we would own them. The county would then own and maintain those features. So it is somewhat dependent on where the feature falls. But those, again, those details are worked out and agreed to during the design phase. We would sit down and say, here is where all the features would be. These fall within state right of way. We propose that these be state-owned and maintained features, and we would design them to your standards. These are features that would be in our right of way, and we would design them to the county standard, and ultimately the county's Department of Environmental Protection would own and maintain those features.
Now, I heard you mention with regard to that traffic is down during COVID and presently, but I haven't heard you mention about bus ridership, whether that's down as well.
So overall it is. The flash service started during the pandemic, so we have no pre-pandemic ridership comparison for the flash service. What I can say is that for a service that started completely brand new and started during the pandemic, the ridership is doing very well. Just like anything that starts new, we expect some kind of buildup period to have to occur before we start to realize the forecasted ridership. And compared to other routes within the county system over the pandemic, the flash service was performing very highly compared to other bus routes. The feedback that we've gotten from the community has been very positive. I don't have specific ridership figures. We can definitely get those for you, but I think generally overall, we have seen ridership levels dip, but they are returning. We've also seen them over time.
Okay, does that include regular bus service as well, that ridership is high enough to justify what you're doing? Because the assumption here is that all the buses will use it, not just the flash buses.
So I think in terms of the managed lane, all of the buses could use it. Now, it's designed more specifically to benefit the flash, specifically because some of the stations are proposed to be relocated. But any bus could use the managed lane. The median bus lane, because of its separation from everything, would really only benefit the flash, at least as currently envisioned, because there are no local bus stops which stop more frequently in the median. Those would be out on the curb. South of Sligo Creek Parkway, if a bus lane is implemented, it would likely be implemented on the curb side. And so all the buses heading into Silver Spring would then benefit from having that bus lane. And that's the way it was modeled for our results.
Now, I've seen your data with regard to how bus time and HOV time is benefited, but I haven't seen anything with regard to how an ordinary passenger vehicle that is not HOV, the travel, does that necessarily imply that that travel time will increase?
Kyle, can you flip back to the charts? There you go. So the chart that you see here is the morning southbound. And so the blue color is what happens if we don't do anything. So you can see car travel time is about 55 minutes. Flash travel time is 42, 43 minutes. Under the managed lane scenario, you can see that there's 3 columns for the purple. And so the very first column, the sportier looking car, is just south of 40 minutes. So that is single occupant vehicles. That is, if you're driving by yourself, you would see a travel time improvement under the managed lane scenario.
Okay.
The other 2 lines, the middle one being the flash bus, and then the rightmost one being the carpool, would drop to south of 25 minutes. And so that's a pretty sizable improvement in travel time. The red color is for the median bus lane. So the first column that sits right about unchanged at 55 minutes is all drivers, really, not carpools or any others. And then the flash bus sits at 23, 24 minutes. And then in the PM, if you flip to the other, again, same color scheme, blue being no build, purple being managed lane, with the first column being single occupant vehicles, and the last column being the carpools, and then the median bus lane with all vehicles and the bus. So we do see more travel time improvements for single occupant vehicles, I would say probably in the PM in both scenarios, not as pronounced in the morning peak.
With regard to, let's consider PM use between Sligo Creek Parkway and north. You currently have 4 lanes going into 3. What this would propose with a dedicated bus lane would be 3 car lanes into 2. So that seems to be more of a congestion issue. Does that seem like that would be the case?
Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it stays 3 into 3. We didn't drop lanes north of Sligo, correct?
Well, Sligo only has room for 3. North of Sligo Creek has room for 3, but I'm assuming you're going to do the AM PM changes.
So Corey, if you go back to that cross section for the managed lane slide, the AM, or Kyle, I forget which slide it was.
Yeah, I'm talking about at Sligo Creek Parkway.
So if you look at, go to the AM one, Kyle. One more.
Well, you can look at the PM one.
Yeah.
All right.
So if you see the yellow line on the right,
Yeah.
it actually starts at Sligo Creek heading south. So that's exactly where the reversible lane begins today. And that reversible lane, instead of having a green arrow, would say bus carpool only when it's active south of Sligo. Between Sligo and all the way up to Southwood, there's no changes. Everything runs as it is today. The flash can be in any lane and regular passenger cars can be in any lane.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering, you have 4 lanes currently going north, intersecting Sligo Creek Parkway, and they then go into 3 lanes.
Right, so the reversible lane runs 4 lanes southbound in the morning and 4 lanes northbound in the evening. So we are proposing removing one of those lanes. But it's the same rationale, because with the carpool vehicles, they'll be able to use that extra lane. So if you can encourage even 10% of the people additionally to carpool, you could remove traffic from those general purpose lanes and you'll only need 3. At least that was our hypothesis when we started the study several years ago. And now with COVID, reducing commuting volumes into downtown Silver Spring, because a lot of people are still, working remote or hybrid, that even holds more true.
Okay, well, I was just wondering, you're going 4 to 3 now, and then you would be going 3 to 2. So that makes it more difficult to combine.
We don't have a proposal to go from 3 to 2.
Well, one of them would be a bus lane.
South of Sligo, we do not have a proposal to go from 3 to 2.
No, I understand. I'm talking about north of Sligo.
So north of Sligo from 650 to either Burnt Mills or Southwood, yes, we're going from 3 to 2. And in that area, we've run the numbers, and with the conversion to some carpoolers, we do see traffic moving through there.
Okay. What about sidewalk changes south of Sligo Creek Parkway? You mentioned that there is another group considering these things with regard to possible bike or something like that.
So there is a list of improvements that were identified from, compiling from master plans, the bicycle master plan, and other previous planning efforts. All of those would need to be thoroughly vetted through a formal design process for making sidewalk changes south of Sligo. So there's no specific project to improve the sidewalk south of Sligo at this time. In fact, the funding that we have in this current fiscal year is only earmarked for improvements north of Randolph Road and Cherry Hill Road. It came from the state through a grant, and so it needs to be used in a specific delegates district. So not until, I think it's fiscal year 25, so that's 2 years away, do we have funding to look at improvements south of that area of the county.
Now,
Norman, I wanted to just circle back real quick to your north of Sligo Parkway.
yeah,
So right here, you can see the concept, which is approaching Franklin. And we're maintaining those 3 northbound lanes through Franklin.
well, one of them is dedicated to a bus.
So the gray area in the middle is the single bus lane.
Yeah.
And then you have 3 striped regular travel lanes. So we would maintain the 3 lanes. There is a little bit of widening here, which you can see that darker gray in the outer does widen a little bit. But it is maintaining 3 lanes in this concept. Okay,
now, north of Sligo, you're going to be having medians. Is there going to be an availability for somebody to make if they live on, say, the northbound side of Coastal Road, can they make a left turn out of their driveway? Presumably they can't because you're having long medians there. So have you calculated what somebody would have to do in order to go south if they live on the northbound side of Colesville Road in terms of going around the neighborhood?
So there's currently a median that separates north of Sligo Creek all the way up to the Beltway. And so people can't currently turn out of their driveways and go south, or vice versa, turn out of their driveway and head north. And so they would have to go out and do a U-turn at an intersection. And so that remains generally unchanged in our configuration. Now we have closed a couple of intersections to restrict access, but added additional signals to provide access in all directions.
Now, with regard to the managed lanes, will they work throughout 24 hours or is it a special times AM, PM?
It was modeled for the peak period and the peak direction. And so when the traffic levels are not that great, it would revert back to just a general use.
Okay. Okay, I think you've handled all of them. If I think more, I'll see you next week. And thank you very much. Very nice presentation.
Thanks for coming. I see there was a new question that dropped into the chat. Can enforcement of HOV be automated with cameras, or must we rely on police stopping people to hold people accountable?
It can definitely be automated. The technology has advanced. I think SHA piloted something on I-270 for that, but you know, we'd have to coordinate with SHA and maybe even look at what some other jurisdictions are doing. I know the red bus lane enforcement has also improved. Sometimes the cameras are on the buses, sometimes, you know, mounted on the front of the buses. Sometimes the cameras are mounted, you know, just like a red light camera, you know, that you might see, or speed camera that you might see around the county. So the technology is there. It really just needs to be, you know, discussed with State Highway and, you know, and how they want to implement it. But it is absolutely an option.
Thanks, Paul. Any other questions? According to slides 12 and 13, the managed lane alternative offers time savings not only for the BRT, but also for both passenger vehicles and carpool vehicles. By comparison, the median bus lane alternative has no impact on passenger or carpool vehicles and less benefit for BRT and is the most expensive alternative. Why would one ever choose the median bus lane alternative, considering that it is the most expensive, but not the most helpful and has potential pedestrian safety risks? Am I not understanding this correctly? So I think, you know, when Paul was answering the question about, you know, safety risks, I think what he was trying to articulate was that it would be a change in how the corridor functions and feels. You know, currently, if you're trying to cross US 29, you're crossing all the way from one curb to the other. You know, you're not trying to access something in the middle of the road. So by creating a median lane and putting a median station in at, say, Four Corners or at Burke Mills, we would be placing a destination in the median. Now, those destinations would be at signalized crossings, and so people would have the ability to call for a signal and get, you know, a safe crossing signal to get to those median stations. But it is a change. There are many examples across, you know, the United States and Canada of median bus lanes functioning perfectly fine, you know, with no negative safety impacts. So it's difficult to say, you know, is one alternative safer than the other? I think what we were trying to say is that one is more different in terms of how the road functions, or how people would interact with the road, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's less safe. In terms of, you know, the cost benefit question, you know, that's really, you know, for you know, the community to weigh and provide feedback on, you know, for the planning board to weigh and provide feedback on, and ultimately for the county council, you know, to take all that information and to decide, is that something that the county wants to invest in to move forward? You know, we're not, you know, saying that one of these options is better than the other. You know, each has pros and cons, and that's what these studies are about, is to lay those out and collect feedback so that the decision makers can then make an informed decision as to how best to invest the county's funds.
Corey, I think one other small note would just be if you are putting in a median bus lane, reliability, it's only going to be the bus that's using it. It's never going to be mixing with HOV vehicles. So that is another thing to consider in the differences between the two.
Good point, Kyle.
Yeah, and I think also, but before this goes out to the full public, some of the considerations are not necessarily just the quantifiable. Oh, the bus moves at this speed, the car moves at this speed, and the cost and right of way. There's also urban design and aesthetic considerations, and I think that's why we worked hard in this additional phase of the study to bring the cost as close as we could between the two alternatives, because there are many that have desired for decades, literally, a traditional median busway along this corridor. So we're here to present the facts. We're not here to sway you one way or another, but just trying to say there's some non-quantifiable opinions about what's important in this corridor too.
Another question, what's the best way to express interest in pursuing 10-foot lanes? I think this would be super helpful for achieving a great outcome, more economical, and I hope the state and feds would agree. So the survey doesn't have a question about lane widths. There is, I recall, and Kyle, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there is the ability to put in kind of an open-ended response there. If not, by all means, you can send those comments to me. And Kyle, did we drop in a contact slide in here? That may have been something we overlooked. But my contact information was on the flyers that went out. I can definitely drop it into the chat before we close out tonight. You can put those in. It really doesn't come into play until we get to the design phase, assuming that a decision is made to move forward with something. At that stage, we would start to lay out the design and assume a certain lane width and try to work with the state and, if necessary, the feds to get agreement on what the appropriate lane width should be. Kyle, a follow-up question to your comment about the median bus lane. Given what you said about how the median bus lane would perform, that it doesn't have other modes, it's not sharing the lane with anyone, why is the performance not better?
So there are a few things about that. So the managed lane does have an inherent mode shift. And so you're actually reducing somewhat of this as the single occupancy vehicles, and they are shifting to HOV. And that is causing the overall volumes to kind of decrease just in general through the corridor. And so some of your more congested points may be operating slightly better due to that mode shift. In the median bus lane alternative, there are some queue jumps and some unique phasing and some additional signals needed to really protect the bus lane. And so those additional signals, even if they have certain types of TSP and whatnot for transit, there's still some additional delay based on those additional signals. And then at like Burnt Mills, for example, we do have to kind of jump the bus in the northbound direction, for example, to the curb And that was in order to fit the station design with the median with minimizing impacts. So I think it's primarily some of those increases are, although it is by itself, there are some increases associated with some of the signal related delays that are required to make a dedicated bus lane safe. Hopefully that answered the question.
I mean, the performances are really close for the bus in either alternative.
Any other questions? We're showing it's almost 8:30. We're here scheduled to be here for another half hour, but this time is really y'all's time. So if there are no further questions, we can definitely close the meeting early. You don't feel like you need to stick around. Again, the meeting is recorded. So if you do have to leave for whatever reason before 9, you can always go back and either review the minutes from the meeting or watch the video itself. Just a little trick, you can turn the speed up just a little bit. The video will run a little faster and my voice will be a little bit higher pitched and speaking. So. All right, well, I'm going to suggest we'll stick around for a little bit longer. We'll say 8:35. If we don't get any additional questions, then we'll call it a night and welcome anyone that wants to go through round 2 next Thursday in person. So there's a question about when the website will be updated. We have to upload the video and get it onto YouTube and get the minutes typed. Given that it's Thursday, I would say at best case, probably sometime by the middle of next week, we can definitely put the presentation up tomorrow and possibly the recording if I can get that uploaded to YouTube and there are no technical issues with that. The minutes will probably lag a little bit and probably be middle of next week, but we'll try and get those up as quickly as we can. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining us, for taking time out of your evenings. I know everyone's time is precious and we all have lots going on. So I appreciate you taking the time to come out. And as Paul said, asking really good questions about the project. And we look forward to hearing your feedback. All right, seeing no further questions, I'm gonna go ahead and close the meeting at 8:30 so that we don't have to sit around here and stare at each other on our screen. So again, thank you everyone for coming out, or not really coming out virtually and joining us from your couches or wherever you're from. And we look forward to hearing from you. And if you are so inclined, seeing you next week. Have a great night, everyone.
All right.